I'm Mr. Ramsey, saving Western civilization, one student at a time. Welcome to another edition of Mr. Ramsey's Modern European History. I'm your host, Mr. Ramsey, and today we're going to discuss the Middle Ages. In particular, we're actually going to focus on the Franks, including Clovis, Charles Martel, Pepin the Short, Charlemagne, the Treaty of Verdun, and the Holy Roman Empire, to name a couple of things that we're going to discuss today, which also include the Battle of Tours and some other things as well. So let's get started. The first topic I'd like to discuss is the actual term Middle Ages, or Medieval Age, or the Dark Ages. Okay, historians regard these years from roughly 500 AD to 1450 AD or 1500 AD as a low point between the ancient world of the Greek and Roman world and the modern world, which starts basically with the Renaissance. To many historians, this time was important. However, just to let you know, the medieval art, medieval architecture, medieval literature, and music was a major revelation on the joy of the people at the time. Okay, the medieval society actually, its structure provided freedom from all, as well as protection and help for the weak and the poor. And great achievements were seen in all sorts of fields, from theology to medicine to architecture and art in general. Okay, when you have the Middle Ages, when it first begins, roughly in the 500s AD, you see a slow revival of the church. You have a revival of governments under the Holy Roman Empire, and you also have a economic revival. Okay, and eventually the church, which we'll talk about later in another lecture, is gradually going to bring every single European nation state, I don't like using the word nation state, but every country into its fold. Okay, and so it becomes a Christian civilization. Europe does. Okay, and you can see it through its architecture, its intellectual, and also in the holiness. You see the architecture. It reaches a pinnacle when you look at the cathedral at Chartres. Its intellectual pinnacle was reached with St. Thomas Aquinas in his masterful piece, the Summa Theologica, and its holiness is reached with a man named St. Francis of Assisi. And the reason I bring those things up is because a lot of historians look at the Middle Ages as a dark age, that there was no major achievements in the Middle Ages, and it's just a time period that links the ancient world to the modern world, which is actually not true. With any time period, there's a lot of trouble, but also it had some major, beautiful achievements. So let's talk about why we have actually these dark ages occur. Okay, so roughly around the 400s to the 500s, the Roman civilization, what we know as the Roman Empire, starts to collapse. Okay, and one of the major reasons is because of the Germanic invasions. Okay, so roughly around 500, you have these Germanic tribes invading the Roman Empire, especially in the West. Okay, and because of that, you have trade declining, law and order vanishing, you have education disappearing, and so that's the reason why historians would call at least the first portion of the Middle Ages the Dark Ages. And there were several groups of Germanic tribes that invaded the Roman Empire. You have the Angles and Saxons that go to England and the Netherlands region. You have the Ostrogoths and that hang out in the Italian peninsula with the another Germanic tribe called the Lombards. You have the Visigoths that settle in Spain, and then you have the Vandals that settle in North Africa. All these regions were once part of the Roman Empire. And the one Germanic tribe that we're going to talk about today is the Franks. And the Franks actually settles in modern day France. That's why it's called France, is because the Germanic tribes actually settle in Franks. You have all these Germanic tribes throughout Europe, but the Franks are the ones that we're going to focus on today. And they settle actually roughly in 400 in modern day France. Okay, and they become a very strong Germanic tribe. The early rulers of the Franks are called the Merovingian dynasty. The reason why it's called the Merovingian dynasty is they have a leader called Merwig, and he's one of the first kings of the Franks, and so Merwig is the reason why we have the Merovingian dynasty. And the Merovingian dynasty lasts from roughly the 400s all the way to the early 700s until Pepin the Short takes the reign and starts the Carolingian dynasty, which we'll talk about in just a second. But the most important of the Merovingian dynasty is a man named Clovis. Okay? And he becomes king of the Franks roughly in 481 AD. And the reason why he's important is because Clovis becomes the first Germanic ruler that accepts Catholicism. A lot of these Germanic tribes are Arian Christians, but he accepts Orthodox Christianity because of his wife Clotilda. And the history of the Franks, and Clovis in particular, comes from a guy named Gregory of Tours. He writes down the history of the Franks, and he actually explains what actually happened. And I'm going to read from Gregory of Tours of what happened, why Clovis became a Christian. This is from Gregory of Tours. The queen is Clotilda, just so you'll understand. So the queen, Clotilda, did not cease to urge Clovis to recognize the true God and cease worshiping idols. But he could not be influenced in any way to this belief, until at last a war arose with the Alemanni, in which he was driven by necessity to confess what before he had of his free will denied. It came about that as the two armies were fighting fiercely, there was much slaughter, and Clovis' army began to be in danger of destruction. He saw it, and raised his eyes to heaven, and with remorse in his heart he burst into tears, and cried, Jesus Christ, whom Clotilda asserts to be the Son of the living God, who art said to give aid to those in distress, and to bestow victory on those who hope in thee. I beseech thy glory of thy aid, with the vow that thou wilt grant me victory over these enemies, and I shall know that power which she says that people dedicate in thy name have had from thee. I will believe in thee, and be baptized in thy name, for I have invoked my own gods, but as I find, they have withdrawn from aiding me, and therefore I believe that they possess no power, so they do not help those who obey them. I now call upon thee. I desire to believe thee, only let me be rescued from my adversaries. And when he said thus, the Alemanni turned their backs and began to disperse in flight. And when they saw that their king was killed, they submitted to the dominion of Clovis, saying, "Let not the people perish further, we pray. We are yours now." And when he stopped the fighting, and after encouraging the men, retired in peace, and told the queen how he had merited to win the victory by calling on the name of Christ. This happened in the 15th year of his reign. So the reason why I tell you that story is because it's because of Clovis that the Franks become Orthodox Christians. Okay, they were pagan before, and now they've become Orthodox Christian, and so he's going to have his entire kingdom baptized in the name of Christ, for his whole kingdom. All right, and so that's going to be the official religion of the Franks from here till present day. In the meantime, the second thing, there's a couple things that, I mean, you can read about Clotilda and Clovis and Gregory the Tourist, but just to let you know, it took a while because Clotilda actually had the first of her sons baptized, and he died, and so Clovis actually faulted Clotilda for that. Okay, but the important thing that you need to know is that Clovis became Christian, officially Christian, and the Franks and his people became Christians as well. Okay, which leads us roughly 250 years later under a man named Charles Martel. Okay, the reason why Charles Martel is important is because he gains an office known as the Mayor of the Palace. Okay, it's a political position. Basically, it has all the powers of the king, okay, except the title of king. So the importance of the Mayor of the Palace is the title within the what's the word I'm looking for? The king's court. Okay, so you have the official person that's running the kingdom. He's known as Mayor of the Palace. He has all the powers of the king, but he doesn't have the official title as the king. What happens is the king slowly gives the power to this Mayor of the Palace under the Merovingian dynasty, and so basically the Mayor of the Palace runs the kingdom in name of the king. Okay, so it's still the Carolingian dynasty, and in 714, a man named Charles Martel, or Charles the Hammer, okay, becomes Mayor of the Palace. And one of the major things that Charles Martel does, besides running the palace and the kingdom, is he is being attacked, or the kingdom, the Frankish kingdom is being attacked, roughly in 732 AD. So when Charles Martel is Mayor of the Palace, a new threat happens to the Frankish kingdom, and that is the Muslim forces from Africa. In 711, those Muslim forces, called the Moors, basically in 3 years take over in all of Spain from 711, the Iberian Peninsula, from 711 to 713, 714. Okay? And so as they take over Spain, they're now heading towards the Frankish kingdom in France, present-day France. Okay? So there's a huge battle in 732 called the Battle of Tours between the Moors of Islam and the Franks. This invasion by the Moors was led by Abdul Rahman, and Charles Martel is actually defending the Frankish kingdom. And this battle was fought October 10th, 732 AD. All right, and where Charles Martel and his army withholds the advance of the Moors, and eventually, once Abdul was killed, they defeat the Moors. And the reason why that battle is important is because if Charles Martel lost the Battle of Tours, then we would have a different route. In other words, a different religion, because of the fact that we probably would all be Islam. Charles Martel's son was Pepin the Short. Okay? And in 752 AD, he becomes king. Now, Pepin the Short was also mayor of the palace. However, he is actually helping the church reform, and he actually sent a message to the Pope asking, hey, since I have all the power of the king, this is Pepin the Short, shouldn't I also be king? And Pope Zachary, in roughly 752 AD, agreed. And so they dethroned the last Merovingian king, Childeric III, and Pepin the Short then became king of the Franks, with the Pope given his blessing and being anointed. Next time we'll discuss the rest of Pepin's reign and also his son Charlemagne, and then his great-grandsons. See you then.